Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will shake everything you believe about being awake. Right now, as you hear these words, you think you're conscious. You think you're making decisions, choosing your thoughts, directing your life. But Rudolf Steiner, that prophetic voice from the threshold of the 20th century, declared something that still terrifies those who truly hear it. Humanity is asleep. Not metaphorically asleep, not poetically drowsy, but literally unconscious, moving through life in a trance state so complete that most people will live and die without ever suspecting they never woke up. We are sleepwalkers, convinced we're awake, defending our sleep as if it were consciousness itself. The scientific validation exists, fragmented across neuroscience and psychology. Research at Princeton demonstrates that what we call consciousness is largely a narrative construct, a story the brain tells itself about why it's doing what it's already doing unconsciously. Benjamin Libet's experiments prove that decisions are made in the brain up to 7 seconds before conscious awareness of having made them. Free will, as we imagine it, is mostly illusion. Harvard research on automaticity reveals that 95% of human behavior operates below conscious awareness, driven by patterns, conditioning, cultural programming. We're biological robots running software installed by family, society, media, executing programs we never chose and can't see. Stanford studies on conformity demonstrate how easily human behavior is controlled by external authority. The collective hypnosis Steiner described isn't metaphysical speculation. It's measurable psychological fact. But Steiner's understanding went far deeper. He spoke of Ahrimanic forces, beings existing in dimensions adjacent to physical reality, whose purpose is precisely to keep humanity asleep. In anthroposophical teaching, these entities feed on human unconsciousness, growing stronger as humanity becomes more mechanical, more automatic, more divorced from genuine awareness. Every distraction, every addiction, every form of entertainment that pulls attention away from presence serves these forces. The Buddhist teaching of Maya points to same reality. That ordinary waking state is actually dream, elaborate hallucination maintained by constant internal narration. The Gnostic Christians called this world a prison, archons its jailers, and sleep the chains. Hindu Vedanta describes it as identification with the unreal, mistaking temporary forms for eternal reality. Watch for these signs in yourself and others, because they're everywhere once you learn to recognize them. You notice people speaking, but the words come automatically, programmed responses, rather than conscious communication. Watch their eyes, see the lights are on, but nobody's home. Notice how people repeat the same conversations, same complaints, same stories, never learning, never changing, stuck in loops like broken records. Observe how the slightest discomfort sends people reaching for phones, food, substances, anything to avoid being present with themselves. See how anger arises instantaneously, bypassing any conscious choice. Watch yourself honestly. Notice how many of your actions today were truly conscious choices versus automatic responses. How much of your day did you actually witness versus spending lost in thought, in fantasy, and internal dialogue that runs continuously like radio you can't turn off? The progression into deeper sleep follows predictable stages that Steiner mapped with surgical precision. In childhood, there's still some natural consciousness, some connection to spiritual dimensions, not yet severed. But then education begins, not true education, but indoctrination, programming the young mind with approved thoughts. By adolescence, the personality forms, layers of conditioning hardening like cement. In young adulthood, the person finds their role in society, and settling into that role means accepting the sleep as permanent condition. By middle age, the patterns are so established that awakening seems not just difficult, but impossible, even threatening. Why would you want to wake up when sleep is comfortable, when everyone around you is also sleeping, when the whole structure of society is designed to maintain the trance, and this individual sleep creates collective somnambulism, entire societies dreaming the same dream? Watch how entire nations can be manipulated into wars, into hatred of designated enemies, into consumption patterns that destroy the planet, all while believing they're acting consciously. The mechanism is simple. Asleep individuals cluster together, creating what Steiner called the collective Ahrimanic entity, a group consciousness more asleep than any individual, actively hostile to awakening. Families can have this quality. Religious communities certainly do. Political movements, entire civilizations operating as single sleeping organism. And anyone attempting to wake up within such system immediately becomes threat, dangerous, must be marginalized or expelled. The collective defends its sleep with ferocity because the sleep of one depends on the sleep of all. So what is the protocol? First, accept that you're asleep. Stop pretending you're conscious. This admission is revolutionary because it breaks primary defense mechanism. Second, begin observing yourself as if you were a stranger. Watch your thoughts arise without identifying with them. Notice your emotional reactions without being swept away. This is called self-remembering and fourth way tradition, witnessing consciousness in Vedanta. Third, reduce input deliberately. Stop filling every moment with distraction. Sit in silence. Let yourself experience the almost unbearable discomfort of being present with yourself, because that discomfort is withdrawal symptom, sign that addiction to unconsciousness is being interrupted. And here is the culmination. You are not the content of your consciousness, you are consciousness itself. You are not your thoughts, emotions, sensations, not your body, not your personality. You are the aware space in which all of this appears, the unchanging witness, what Steiner called the true I, the eternal individuality that incarnates repeatedly but is never born and never dies. Now we descend into the architecture of human being as Steiner mapped it, and you'll discover you're not one body but three, each operating at different frequencies, each with its own laws, each requiring conscious development if genuine awakening is to occur. Most people identify completely with the physical body, believing themselves to be this meat suit walking around, never suspecting that physical form is merely the densest, slowest vibration of a being extending into dimensions most can't perceive. Steiner called these the physical body, the etheric or life body, and the astral or soul body, and understanding their relationship is understanding the fundamental structure of human consciousness. This isn't theory, this is observable reality once you develop the organs of perception to see it, and those organs can be developed systematically through practices Steiner outlined with precision that modern spirituality has largely lost. The scientific correlates exist, though mainstream science doesn't use Steiner's terminology. The physical body is obvious, studied by conventional medicine and biology. But the etheric body correlates with what modern researchers call the biofield, electromagnetic patterns surrounding living organisms that can now be measured with sensitive equipment. Studies at institutes like HeartMath have documented electromagnetic fields generated by the heart extending several feet from the body, and research on biophotons shows that living cells emit coherent light, what Steiner described as etheric forces. The astral body correlates with what neuroscience calls the default mode network, that aspect of consciousness generating thoughts, emotions, internal narratives, the psychological dimension. Research on near-death experiences, particularly work by Pim van Lommel and Sam Parnia, provides evidence that consciousness can function independent of physical brain, suggesting reality of subtle bodies that survive physical death. Every authentic spiritual tradition describes these multiple levels of human being, though using different languages. In yoga philosophy, they speak of the koshas, sheaths surrounding the true self. Annamaya kosha is physical body. Pranamaya kosha is etheric or energy body. Manomaya kosha is astral or mental body. Tibetan Buddhism describes the three bodies as Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dharmakaya. Kabbalah maps them as Asaya, Yetzira, and Baraya, corresponding to physical, formative, and creative worlds. Chinese medicine works explicitly with qi or qi, the etheric life force, mapping meridians and energy centers that have no physical anatomical correlates, but can be felt directly by anyone who develops sensitivity. Indigenous shamanic traditions worldwide speak of energy, body, spirit body, soul body, recognizing that human being extends far beyond physical form. What's remarkable is the consistency across traditions separated by geography and time, all pointing to same multi-layered structure of human consciousness. The signs that you're only conscious of your physical body and completely unaware of your etheric and astral dimensions are brutally obvious once pointed out. You identify yourself completely with your physical appearance, age, health conditions, believing that when body dies, you cease to exist. You have no sense of your energy body, can't feel the currents of life force moving through you. Never notice that some people energize you while others drain you even without physical contact. You're completely identified with your thoughts and emotions, believing you are your mental content rather than the awareness in which thoughts and emotions appear. When you're tired, you think only about physical rest, never suspecting that etheric and astral bodies also require specific forms of nourishment and rejuvenation that physical sleep doesn't provide. You've never experienced yourself independent of your body, never had out-of-body experience or lucid dream convincing enough to prove that consciousness can function without physical vehicle. The developmental stages of becoming conscious of your three bodies progress from gross to subtle. First stage is simply accepting theoretically that you have these subtle dimensions, even if you can't perceive them yet. This intellectual framework prepares consciousness for direct experience. Second stage is developing sensitivity to your etheric body through practices like Qigong, Tai Chi, or Pranayama that work explicitly with life force. You begin to feel energy, perhaps as tingling, warmth, current, pressure. Initially it's subtle, easily dismissed as imagination, but gradually it becomes undeniable. Third stage is learning to consciously direct your etheric energy through attention and breath, discovering that energy follows awareness. Fourth stage is becoming conscious of your astral body through practices like meditation and lucid dreaming. You observe your thoughts and emotions from outside them, recognizing you are not them, but the witnessing consciousness. Fifth stage is learning to function consciously in astral body independent of physical form, what Steiner called traversing the threshold between physical and spiritual worlds while fully conscious. And understanding your three bodies transforms everything. Your relationship to health shifts dramatically when you realize most illness begins in etheric or astral bodies before manifesting physically. By the time symptoms appear in physical body, subtle bodies have been compromised for weeks, months, sometimes years. If you're sensitive to your etheric body, you can feel disturbances early and address them before they densify into physical disease. Your relationship to death transforms when you know from direct experience that you're not your physical body. Death becomes transition, shedding a physical vehicle, while consciousness continues in subtle bodies. Your relationship to others changes when you recognize you're interacting not just with their physical presence, but with their etheric and astral fields, and that much of what you experience as attraction, repulsion, compatibility, or conflict is actually interaction of these subtle bodies. The protocol for developing consciousness of your three bodies is progressive and methodical. First, establish daily practice of physical yoga or movement that makes you conscious of your physical body as temple rather than just vehicle. Second, learn basic energy practices like simple qi gong exercises or alternate nostril breathing that begin activating conscious perception of etheric body. Spend 10 minutes daily simply sitting and feeling for subtle energy in your hands, your spine, your energy centers. Third, establish meditation practice focused on witnessing thoughts without identifying with them, observing emotions without being overwhelmed, developing capacity to be conscious of your astral body rather than unconsciously identified with it. Fourth, keep dream journal and begin working with lucid dreaming, learning to maintain consciousness during sleep state when physical body is dormant but astral body is fully active. Fifth, study Steiner's specific exercises for developing etheric and astral perception, outlined in his book, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds. And here's the philosophical key. You are not any of these bodies, not the physical, not the etheric, not the astral. You are the eternal I, the consciousness that uses these vehicles but is never limited to them, never defined by them. The physical body is your instrument for acting in physical world. The etheric body is your instrument for maintaining life and connecting with life forces of nature and cosmos. The astral body is your instrument for thinking, feeling, experiencing psychological reality. But you, your true self, your consciousness, is beyond all three, eternal and unchanging, witnessing the changing forms without being touched by them. This is what Steiner meant by the spiritual self, the awakened consciousness that has recognized its true nature and no longer identifies with temporary vehicles. And the incredible thing is that this recognition, this awakening to your true nature beyond the three bodies, is available right now, not as future achievement, but as present reality that simply needs to be consciously recognized, like remembering something you always knew but somehow forgot. Prepare yourself, because what follows will dismantle the very foundation you've built your entire life upon. The sense that you are a fixed, continuous self, an I that persists through time, making choices, having experiences, accumulating memories. Steiner, like the Buddha before him and the awakened mystics after him, declared this fundamental sense of self to be elaborate illusion, construction of memory and habit and identification so convincing that questioning it feels like questioning reality itself. But here's the devastating truth. That person you believe yourself to be, with its history and personality and preferences, doesn't actually exist as solid entity. It's a constellation of changing phenomena you've mistakenly taken to be unchanging subject, temporary patterns you've confused with permanent self. And this confusion, this case of mistaken identity, is the root of all suffering, all fear, all the desperate grasping that characterizes human existence. Neuroscience has stumbled toward this truth despite itself. Research by Michael Gazzaniga on split brain patients revealed that the brain's left hemisphere constantly creates narratives to explain behaviors generated by the right hemisphere, literally making up stories to maintain illusion of unified self. Studies on memory by Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated that memories are not faithful recordings, but constantly reconstructed narratives, changed each time they're recalled. Research on the self by Thomas Metzinger and others suggests that the sense of being a self is generated by brain processes, a useful fiction for navigating social reality, but not corresponding to any actual entity. Studies on neuroplasticity show the brain constantly changing, no 2 moments identical, making the idea of fixed self neurologically impossible. Research using brain imaging shows no center in the brain where you are located. There's no homunculus, no little person inside your head watching the show. There's just processes, patterns, information flows, none of which constitute a self in the way we intuitively believe. Traditional teachings have been screaming this truth for millennia. The Buddha's doctrine of anatta, or anatman, no self, is cornerstone of Buddhist awakening. He taught that what we call self is actually 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, consciousness, none of which constitute a permanent self. When you look for the self, you find only these changing phenomena. Advaita Vedanta's central teaching is neti neti. Not this, systematically negating every identification, until what remains is pure consciousness itself, which was never the personal self to begin with. Steiner's Anthroposophy describes the ego, or I, as something you must consciously develop rather than something you already have, distinguishing between the false personal ego and the true spiritual self. Gurdjieff taught that humans don't have one unified self, but multiple I's, different subpersonalities taking turns running the show, creating illusion of continuity through memory. Zen Buddhism's koan practice is designed explicitly to shatter conceptual self, forcing direct recognition of what you are beyond all concepts. The signs that you're trapped in false self are everywhere in your experience. You defend your opinions as if they're attacks on your existence because you've identified yourself with your beliefs. You feel hurt when criticized because you've confused your constructed self-image with what you are. You're terrified of death because you believe the self you've constructed will cease to exist. You compare yourself constantly to others, feeling superior or inferior, because the self needs to know where it stands in hierarchy. You hold grudges, unable to let go of past hurts, because the narrative self requires consistency, needs to maintain the story of who wronged you. You resist change, even positive change, because the self is invested in continuity, in being the same person it was yesterday. You experience anxiety about the future, because the self projects itself forward, imagining scenarios where it might be threatened. Watch carefully, notice how much mental and emotional energy goes into maintaining this illusion of being a solid, continuous, separate self. The stages of recognizing the illusion progress from intellectual understanding to direct realization. First stage is conceptual understanding that the self might be illusion, which already creates some space, some disidentification. Second stage is observing your thoughts and noticing they arise spontaneously, unbidden, that you don't choose them before they appear, which begins to undermine the sense that thoughts are your thoughts. Third stage is recognizing that emotions arise and pass like weather, that you don't create them deliberately, they happen to you, which begins dissolving identification with emotional states. Fourth stage is observing yourself in different contexts, noticing that you are different with different people, in different situations, that there's no fixed self but rather adaptive responses to circumstances. Fifth stage is direct glimpse of awareness itself, recognizing that you are not the changing content of consciousness, but the unchanging witnessing presence, what Steiner called the eternal I beyond the personal ego. This glimpse is often brief, a crack in the edifice, but once seen, it can never be completely forgotten. And this recognition ripples outward, transforming everything it touches. When you recognize yourself as illusion, you stop taking everything so personally. Criticism doesn't wound because there's less solid self to wound. Praise doesn't inflate because there's less self to inflate. Conflicts with others decrease dramatically because you're not constantly defending a self that doesn't actually exist. Fear diminishes because fear always involves a self that might be harmed, and if there's no solid self, what exactly is threatened? Creativity explodes because the self, with its need for certainty and control, was actually blocking spontaneous expression. Compassion arises naturally because the boundaries that separated self from other are revealed as artificial constructions. Life becomes play rather than desperate struggle because there's nobody who needs life to go a particular way to validate their existence. This isn't nihilism, this is liberation. The false self dies, and what remains is vast, spacious awareness, playing all the roles, experiencing all the experiences, but never trapped in identification with any of them. The protocol for working with this teaching is challenging because it requires investigating the very investigator. First, ask repeatedly throughout the day, who am I? Not to find answer, but to notice that every answer you give is just another thought, another object of awareness, not the aware subject. Second, observe thoughts arising and ask, who is thinking this thought? You'll notice the thought appears, then a split second later, you claim ownership of it, but in that gap, you can see the thought arose by itself. Third, in meditation, search for the one who is meditating. Look for yourself. You'll find body sensations, thoughts, emotions, memories, but no solid separate self anywhere. Fourth, Practice seeing yourself as others see you, recognizing that their version of you is different from your version of you, proving that you are construct, not fixed reality. Fifth, in moments of strong emotion, ask, who is feeling this? The emotion is happening, but who is the feeler? If you look honestly, you'll find the feeling, but no feeler apart from the feeling itself. We arrive at the ultimate recognition, both terrifying and liberating beyond measure. There is no separate self, there never was, and yet life continues, awareness continues, experience continues, more vibrantly than before because it's no longer filtered through the narrow lens of illusory self. What you are is not the small, personal self you've been defending and maintaining your whole life. You are the vast awareness in which that small self appears, the consciousness that was here before the self formed in childhood and will remain when the self dissolves at death. You are, as Steiner declared with prophetic certainty, the eternal I, not personal but universal, not separate but connected to all consciousness everywhere. And this realization, when it comes, isn't loss but discovery of what you always were beneath the costume of personality. The false self must die, must be seen through, not because self is bad, but because it's not real. And mistaking yourself for illusion creates all the suffering you've ever experienced. When the illusion is recognized as illusion, what remains is what was always real, always here, always awake, waiting patiently for you to stop looking everywhere else and finally recognize your own true face, the face you had before you were born, the consciousness that will remain long after this particular body returns to dust. There exists within you right now, reading these words, hearing this voice, a presence that has never changed, never been born, will never die, a witnessing consciousness that observes everything but is touched by nothing, what Steiner called the eternal I, and what mystics across traditions have pointed toward with desperate fingers because it cannot be grasped with the mind, only recognized directly in a flash of clarity that dissolves the entire framework of subject and object. This witness is not something you need to develop or achieve or attain through years of practice. It is what you already are right now, beneath all the layers of identification, beneath all the thinking and feeling and doing. You are the awareness in which all of life is happening, the still point around which everything revolves, the silent observer that has been watching the entire movie of your life from before the opening credits to whatever scene is playing now. And the tragedy, the cosmic joke that would be hilarious if it weren't so devastating, is that you've been looking everywhere for this, seeking it in experiences and states and achievements, when it's the one thing that can't be found because it's what's doing the looking. The neuroscience of the observer is fascinating precisely because science keeps bumping into something it can't explain. Studies on meditation, particularly by researchers like Judson Brewer at Yale, show decreased activity in the default mode network during witnessing states, that network of brain regions associated with self-referential thinking. But here's what confounds materialist neuroscience. Awareness itself doesn't correlate with any specific brain activity. You can map neural correlates of thoughts, emotions, perceptions, but consciousness itself, the fact of being aware, doesn't light up on brain scans because it's not generated by the brain but received by it, like television set receives signal without creating the broadcast. Research on psychedelics by Robin Carhart Harris shows that ego dissolution, the temporary loss of sense of separate self, doesn't decrease consciousness, but expands it, suggesting that the self-structure actually constrains awareness rather than producing it. Studies on near-death experiences reveal conscious awareness continuing when brain activity has ceased. Documented cases where patients accurately reported events during periods of clinical death when no neural activity should have been possible according to materialist paradigm. Every tradition that penetrated beyond surface spirituality arrived at this recognition of the witness consciousness. In Vedanta, they call it Sakshi, the eternal witness that observes the play of existence without being involved in it. The Upanishads declare Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that, pointing to identity between individual consciousness and universal consciousness. Buddhism speaks of Rigpa, pure awareness that exists before and beyond all conceptual elaboration. Zen's famous koan, "What was your original face before your parents were born?" points directly to this consciousness that precedes personal identity. Christian mysticism, particularly in Meister Eckhart, speaks of the ground of being consciousness as fundamental reality from which all phenomena emerge. Sufism describes the friend, the divine presence that is simultaneously within you and beyond you, your true nature. Even modern philosophy, in Phenomenology of Edmund Husserl and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, recognizes that pure consciousness, the transcendental subject, can never be fully objectified because it's the precondition for all objectification. The signs that you've lost contact with the witness, that you're completely identified with thoughts and emotions, rather than resting as awareness itself, are continuous and relentless in ordinary consciousness. You believe you are your thoughts, that internal dialogue running constantly. When thought says, "I'm anxious," you believe you are anxiety rather than the awareness noticing anxiety. You get lost in emotions, swept away by anger or fear or desire, forgetting that these are weather patterns moving through awareness, not the awareness itself. You take credit for good outcomes and blame yourself for bad ones, never recognizing that both are simply happenings occurring in the field of awareness. You feel like you're inside your head, looking out through your eyes, trapped in body, when actually awareness is the space in which body appears. You experience time as heavy reality rather than conceptual overlay on the timeless present that awareness inhabits. You fear death of the body because you've completely identified with the body, forgetting that awareness watching the body is untouched by what happens to it. The stages of recognizing yourself as witness follow progression from conceptual understanding to direct realization. First stage is intellectual grasp, that you might be awareness rather than content of awareness, which already creates some space. Second stage is glimpses during meditation or in gaps between thoughts, where you notice awareness itself, notice that you're noticing. These gaps are brief but revelatory. Third stage is deliberately resting as witness during daily activities, maintaining thread of awareness that observes thoughts arising, emotions moving, actions happening, without losing yourself completely in them. This is what Gurdjieff called self-remembering. Fourth stage is recognizing that the witness has always been present, that you've always been awareness, but were too distracted by content to notice the context. Fifth stage is stable abiding as witness, what Ramana Maharshi called sahaja samadhi, where awareness of awareness becomes continuous, effortless, the natural state that was always there beneath the agitation of seeking. And this recognition transforms everything, though ironically, nothing changes except perspective. The witness doesn't solve your problems, doesn't make you special, doesn't eliminate difficulties of human existence. But it provides unshakable foundation, still point in turning world. When you know yourself as awareness, thoughts still arise but don't define you. Emotions still flow but don't overwhelm you. Body ages and eventually dies, but you recognize yourself as what was never born. Relationships become easier because you're not constantly projecting need for validation onto others. Work becomes more creative because you're not trapped in the limited identity of the doer. Suffering doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it fundamentally shifts. Pain is still felt, but there's no longer suffering about suffering, no resistance that creates secondary psychological torment. Life continues exactly as before, yet completely differently, because you've discovered what you are beneath all the costumes, all the stories, all the identifications that created the sense of being small, separate, vulnerable self. The protocol for awakening to witness consciousness is ruthlessly simple, though far from easy. First, in meditation, ask yourself, who is meditating? Look for the meditator. You'll find body sitting, thoughts flowing, but no separate entity doing the meditation. This absence is the presence you're looking for. Second, throughout the day, pause and notice, I am aware. Don't think about awareness, just recognize the fact of being aware. Do this repeatedly until awareness of awareness becomes familiar. Third, when thoughts arise, don't follow them or fight them. Notice that you are the space in which thoughts appear and disappear, like sky in which clouds come and go. Fourth, observe emotions without identifying as them. Instead of, I am angry, recognize anger is present in awareness. This tiny shift in language reflects massive shift in identity. Fifth, practice what Ramana Maharshi called self-inquiry. Ask constantly, who am I? Not to find answer, but to recognize that every answer is just another object in awareness, not the aware subject itself. We arrive at the ultimate teaching, simple and devastating. You are not what you think you are. You are not your body, not your mind, not your history, not your future, not your achievements or failures, not your relationships, not your thoughts or emotions or sensations. You are the aware presence in which all of this appears, the consciousness that was here before anything appeared and will remain after everything disappears. This is what Steiner meant when he spoke of the true I, the eternal individuality that reincarnates through multiple lives but is never born and never dies. Consciousness itself using temporary forms to experience itself, to know itself, to wake up to itself. And the extraordinary thing, the truth that makes all spiritual seeking ultimately absurd, is that you are already this. You don't need to become the witness, you are the witness, have always been the witness, could never be anything but the witness. What's required is not achievement but recognition, not attaining something new but seeing what was always here, closer than your breath, more intimate than your thoughts, the one constant in every changing experience. Awareness itself, witnessing the movie of existence without ever being trapped in it, eternal and free and absolutely here, now, always. Now we enter dangerous territory the realm Steiner called the threshold between physical and spiritual worlds. And here's what almost no modern spiritual teacher will tell you. There are forces, intelligences, entities whose entire function is preventing your awakening. Not because they're evil in simplistic sense, but because they serve necessary function in cosmic order, testing readiness, ensuring that consciousness doesn't expand before it has developed strength to handle expanded awareness. Steiner called these the guardians of the threshold, and he described them with precision that still disturbs those who encounter his teachings deeply. There are two guardians. The lesser guardian, which is essentially your own shadow, all the repressed, denied, unintegrated aspects of yourself accumulated across your lifetime and possibly across multiple incarnations. And the greater guardian, which is something else entirely, cosmic force that must be faced and passed before genuine spiritual perception becomes possible. Understanding these guardians is essential because if you attempt to force your way across the threshold without proper preparation, without having integrated your shadow and developed necessary strength, the result is not enlightenment but madness, psychosis, spiritual inflation that destroys rather than liberates. Science doesn't speak of guardians, but depth psychology comes closest to mapping this territory. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow is precise description of the lesser guardian. All the qualities we've denied in ourselves and projected onto others, all the repressed trauma and unintegrated experience, all the parts of ourselves we've locked in the basement of consciousness because they threatened our self-image. Research on psychological integration, particularly in trauma therapy, shows that attempting to bypass shadow material through spiritual practice doesn't eliminate it, but actually strengthens its unconscious grip. Studies on spiritual bypass by psychologist John Wellwood document how people use spiritual beliefs to avoid dealing with psychological wounds, creating what he called premature transcendence. Research on psychosis shows clear correlation between forced awakening experiences, particularly through psychedelics without proper set and setting, and psychotic breaks. The guardians aren't metaphysical fantasy, they're psychological reality, protective mechanisms that become destructive if not respected and properly engaged. Traditional teachings about threshold guardians appear across cultures with remarkable consistency. In shamanic initiation worldwide, the candidate must face demons, monsters, terrifying forces that test whether they're ready for expanded consciousness. These aren't symbolic. Initiates report genuine encounters with autonomous forces. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Bardo Thodol, or Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes wrathful deities appearing after death, terrifying forms that are actually your own mind's creations, projections of unintegrated elements. If you recognize them as such, you pass through. If you're overwhelmed by fear, you're trapped in lower realms. In Christian mysticism, the dark night of the soul, described by John of the Cross, is threshold experience, where everything you thought you knew dissolves, all comfort stripped away, leaving you naked before the infinite. Those who endure this dark night emerge transformed. Those who flee remain trapped in consolation religion. In ancient mystery schools, from Eleusinian to Egyptian, candidates underwent terrifying ordeals designed to test readiness. Many failed, some went mad. Only those who maintained consciousness through terror were initiated into deeper mysteries. The signs that you're approaching the threshold and encountering the guardians are unmistakable and often terrifying. Your meditation practice that was peaceful suddenly becomes disturbed by intense emotions, disturbing thoughts, sometimes actual visions of terrifying figures. Dreams become vivid, nightmarish, filled with images of death, decay, demons, darkness. Old traumas you thought were healed resurface with intensity that shocks you. Relationships become mirrors, showing you precisely what you haven't wanted to see about yourself. You might experience what spiritual traditions call purification crisis, physical illness, emotional breakdown, life circumstances collapsing, all serving function of stripping away false supports before real awakening can occur. You encounter what Jung called the inflation, moments where you feel spiritually special, chosen, superior, which is actually ego's last desperate attempt to maintain control by colonizing spiritual experience. Or conversely, you experience what mystics call desolation, feeling abandoned by divine, convinced you're worthless, that awakening is impossible for you. Both inflation and desolation are tests, guardians in different guises. The stages of working with the guardians follow initiatory pattern recognized across traditions. First stage is encountering the lesser guardian, your personal shadow. This requires ruthless self-honesty, willingness to look at parts of yourself you've denied, projected onto others, hidden even from yourself. Shadow work is not pleasant. It requires admitting ways you've harmed others, ways you've deceived yourself, aspects of your personality you find repulsive. Second stage is integration of shadow, which doesn't mean acting out shadow material, but consciously acknowledging it, withdrawing projections, taking responsibility for your whole self. This creates unified personality, what Jung called individuation. Third stage is confronting the greater guardian, which appears when personal shadow work is sufficiently advanced. This is encounter with something transpersonal, cosmic force that demands surrender of everything you think you are. Fourth stage is the actual crossing of the threshold, which cannot be described because it's death of the one who would describe it. Fifth stage is return, bringing back gifts from beyond the threshold while remaining functional in ordinary reality. This is the challenge: to be awake while appearing asleep, to see what others don't see while not becoming alienated from human community. And understanding the guardians prevents two catastrophic errors common in modern spirituality. First error is attempting to bypass them through forced techniques, drugs, extreme practices that try to blast through threshold without proper preparation. This can work temporarily, but usually ends in crisis, burnout, or worse. The guardians exist for reason, forcing you to develop strength before expanding consciousness. Second error is denying the guardians exist, treating spirituality as all light and love, refusing to acknowledge shadow, darkness, difficulty. This creates spiritual bypass. People who speak enlightenment language but haven't done the actual work, who remain psychologically immature despite spiritual vocabulary. Both errors stem from same source: wanting awakening without paying its price, wanting transformation without undergoing death of false self, wanting the treasure without facing the dragon that guards it. The protocol for working with the guardians is demanding but clear. First, establish strong foundation in basic practices: regular meditation, physical exercise, healthy relationships, stable life circumstances. Don't attempt advanced work if your basics aren't solid. Second, begin shadow work, either through self-inquiry or preferably with skilled therapist or guide. Make list of everyone you resent, everyone you judge, and ask, what quality am I seeing in them that I've denied in myself? Third, when disturbing material arises, don't push it away or indulge it. Observe it consciously, bring awareness to it, allow it to be present without acting it out or repressing it. Fourth, develop what Steiner called moral strength through deliberate practice of virtues: courage, honesty, compassion, patience. These aren't old-fashioned morality, they're survival skills for threshold work. Fifth, find community of others doing this work. This cannot be done alone. You need others who can hold space when you're falling apart, who can call out your inflation, who can confirm you're not crazy when ordinary reality starts looking very strange. We arrive at sobering recognition. The path to awakening is not gentle, not safe, not comfortable. It requires facing everything you've spent your life avoiding, dying to everything you've spent your life becoming, surrendering control to something vastly larger than personal will. The guardians stand at the threshold for good reason, to ensure that only those ready to handle expanded consciousness are granted access to it. Many are called, few are chosen, not because some cosmic authority is being selective, but because few have the strength, the courage, the desperation to do what's required. Most people prefer a comfortable sleep to terrifying awakening, and that's fine, there's no judgment in this. But if you've heard the call, if something in you refuses to remain asleep, no matter how frightening the prospect of waking up, then you must face the guardians. There's no way around them, only through them. And on the other side, if you survive the crossing, if you integrate what they demand you integrate, if you die to what they demand you die to, what waits is not some blissful state, but something far more valuable: the ability to see reality directly, to live from truth rather than illusion, to be genuinely awake in a world of sleepers. This is what Steiner called initiation, and it remains available to anyone willing to pay its price. Here we confront the teaching that makes all seekers eventually turn back, the price that must be paid for genuine awakening. Everything you think you are must die, not metaphorically die, not poetically transform, but actually cease to exist as organizing principle of consciousness. The false self, that construction of memory and desire and fear that you call me, that identity you've spent your entire life building and defending and improving, must be completely dismantled, burned in the fire of awareness, until nothing remains but what was always real beneath the costume. Steiner spoke of this as necessary crisis on the path of initiation, moment when the old consciousness dies and new consciousness is born, and he warned with prophetic gravity that many who reach this point flee in terror back to comfortable prison of ordinary awareness, rather than undergo the death that awakening demands. Because, make no mistake, this is death, as real as physical death, perhaps more real, the death of the one who thinks, who worries, who plans, who fears, who grasps, who believes itself to be separate entity, navigating hostile world. Neuroscience has documented what happens during ego-death experiences, particularly through research on psychedelics by Robin Carhart Harris and others. Brain imaging shows that ego dissolution corresponds with decreased activity in the default mode network, that constellation of brain regions maintaining sense of self across time, generating the narrative that creates continuity of identity. When this network's activity decreases dramatically, the boundaries of self dissolve. Subjects report experiences of unity with cosmos, dissolution of separation between self and other, confrontation with the void, sense of dying. These aren't hallucinations. They're direct experiences of what consciousness is like when the self-structure temporarily ceases operating. Research on mystical experiences by Roland Griffiths using psilocybin shows that individuals who undergo complete ego death often rate it as among the most significant experiences of their lives, comparable to birth of child or death of parent. And these experiences correlate with lasting positive psychological changes. But here's what research can't fully capture: the absolute terror of the moment when you realize that you, as you've always known yourself, are about to cease to exist, and there's no guarantee anything will remain. Traditional teachings about necessary death of false self are unambiguous and terrifying. Jesus stated it explicitly: unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. He wasn't speaking symbolically about moral improvement, but describing actual death of ego required for rebirth in spirit. The Sufi mystic Rumi wrote, "Die before you die," pointing to necessity of undergoing ego death while still alive in physical body. Buddhist teaching speaks of great death that must precede great awakening, moment where even the one seeking awakening must die. Zen masters created koans specifically designed to kill the conceptual mind, to push consciousness to edge where it either shatters completely or leaps into entirely different mode of knowing. In alchemical traditions, the nigredo, or blackening stage, is necessary death and putrefaction of base matter before transformation into gold can occur. They weren't speaking metaphorically about chemical processes, but describing psychological death initiates must undergo. In Christian mysticism, the crucifixion isn't just a historical event, but template for spiritual death, the moment when everything is lost, when God himself seems absent, when there's nothing to hold on to and nowhere to go but into darkness. The signs that you're approaching this death are unmistakable if you're honest with yourself. Everything that once gave meaning starts feeling empty. Achievements you worked for feel meaningless. Relationships that defined you feel hollow. Beliefs you held start crumbling. Your sense of who you are becomes increasingly unstable, fragmented, like you're losing grip on your own identity. Depression might set in, not clinical depression, requiring medication, but existential depression. Dark night of the soul, where nothing makes sense anymore and death starts looking less frightening than continuing to live as who you've been. You might experience what spiritual traditions call the dark night, where every spiritual experience you've had disappears, where meditation becomes dry, where divine seems absent, where you're stripped of all consolation and left naked in darkness. This isn't failure of practice. This is the practice working, dissolving the false supports before real awakening can occur. Or you might experience fear so intense it feels like actual dying, panic attacks, sense that you're going crazy, that you're losing your mind. You are losing your mind. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. The stages of ego death follow a pattern that spiritual traditions have mapped for centuries. First stage is recognition that your current identity is causing suffering, that the self you've built isn't working anymore. Second stage is willingness to let it go, which is easier said than lived because ego will generate 1,000 reasons why now isn't right time, why you need to remain as you are. Third stage is the actual death experience itself, which cannot be controlled or predicted. Moment of complete surrender when everything you've held on to is taken away. This can happen in meditation, in crisis, through illness, in relationship breakdown, through psychedelic journey, or sometimes spontaneously without apparent cause. Fourth stage is the void, the gap between death of old identity and birth of new consciousness. Terrifying space of not knowing, not being, where you exist but don't exist as anything definable. Fifth stage is rebirth, emergence of new consciousness that's simultaneously completely new and what you always were beneath the false self. This rebirth isn't return to previous state, but transformation into something unprecedented. And this death, when it occurs, changes everything in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled. Some people emerge from ego death permanently transformed, incapable of returning to previous way of being, even if they wanted to. Others integrate the experience gradually, oscillating between old consciousness and new. Still others emerge traumatized, psychologically shattered, unable to function in ordinary reality. This is why traditional paths insisted on proper preparation, on guru or guide who could determine readiness, on community that could hold space for someone undergoing this transformation. Modern spirituality, with its weekend workshops and instant enlightenment promises, grossly underestimates what's actually required, what's actually at stake. The ego doesn't want to die, will fight desperately to survive, will create spiritual experiences, insights, even apparent awakenings that allow it to continue existing. Real death of false self isn't a pleasant experience you integrate into existing identity, it's complete demolition of that identity. The protocol for this teaching is paradoxical because you cannot force ego death, and attempting to do so usually backfires. But you can prepare conditions where it becomes possible. First, stop reinforcing false self through constant self-reference. Notice how often you think I, me, mine, and each time pause. Question whether this I actually exists as solid entity. Second, practice what mystics call radical surrender, letting go of control moment by moment, allowing life to move you rather than constantly trying to direct it. Third, cultivate what Buddhists call don't know mind, releasing certainty, admitting you don't actually know who you are, what life is, what anything means. Fourth, be willing to lose everything, not in sense of becoming reckless, but in sense of holding everything lightly, knowing that anything that can be lost was never truly yours. Fifth, when terror arises, don't run from it. The fear of death is the guardian at the gate. Move toward it, let it consume you. Discover that on the other side of terror is freedom. We arrive at the ultimate paradox, the teaching that cannot be taught because the one who would hear it must die for it to be understood. You must die completely for your true self to be born, and yet your true self is what survives this death, is what was always there beneath the false self, is what you actually are beyond all identification. The death is real, the terror is real, the loss is absolute and irreversible. But what dies is only what was false, temporary, constructed. What remains is what was always real, always here, always you. Steiner called this the birth of the higher self, the conscious emergence of the eternal I that has been sleeping behind the personality. And once this death has been died, once you've fallen through the floor of your identity and discovered that emptiness is not the end but the beginning, that losing everything is actually finding what can never be lost, you recognize with clarity that splits you open. The false self was prison, its death is liberation, and on the other side of dying to who you thought you were, you discover what you always were, eternal consciousness playing at being temporary person, the infinite pretending to be finite, God forgetting and remembering itself through the vehicle of your awareness. This is rebirth, this is awakening, and it cannot happen until the death has been died. Now we map the actual territory of awakening as Steiner charted it with precision that still shocks those who encounter his systematic approach to what most traditions treat as mysterious and unpredictable. He described specific stages of initiation, not vague poetic states, but concrete developmental levels with recognizable characteristics, practices appropriate to each level, and dangers specific to each stage. This is crucial because modern spirituality treats awakening as a single event. You're either enlightened or you're not, when actual development of consciousness follows evolutionary pattern spanning, years, decades, sometimes multiple lifetimes. Understanding these stages prevents two catastrophic errors: thinking you're more advanced than you are, which leads to spiritual inflation, and thinking you're less advanced, which leads to unnecessary despair. The path is long, the work is demanding, but it is systematic, knowable, and available to anyone willing to undertake it with sincerity and persistence. Developmental psychology has caught up to what esoteric traditions always knew. Consciousness develops in stages, each building on previous, each necessary, none skippable. Research by Jean Piaget on cognitive development, Lawrence Kohlberg on moral development, and more recently by Ken Wilber synthesizing Eastern and Western models, all point to stage theory of human development. Neuroscience research shows that brain continues developing throughout life, particularly in higher cortical regions, associated with abstract thought, moral reasoning, and self-reflection. Studies on meditation practitioners by Richard Davidson and others document measurable changes in brain structure and function corresponding to level of practice, showing that contemplative development produces objective changes in neural architecture. Research on post-conventional development by Suzanne Cook-Greuter and others identifies stages beyond normal adult development where identity becomes increasingly fluid, perspective increasingly comprehensive, and capacity for paradox and complexity dramatically increases. Science is discovering what initiates always knew. Consciousness evolution is real, it follows predictable patterns, and it can be systematically cultivated. Traditional initiation systems all describe stages. In Steiner's Anthroposophy, there's preparation, enlightenment, and initiation proper, each with substages. In yoga, there's 8 limbs from yama and niyama through dhyana to samadhi. In Buddhism, there's detailed maps of progress from preliminary practices through stages of shamatha and vipassana to various levels of realization. In Kabbalah, there's journey through 10 Sephiroth from Malkuth to Kether. In Christian mysticism, there's purgative way, illuminative way, and unitive way. In Sufism, there's stages of the path from Sharia through Tariqa to Hakika. What's remarkable is consistency despite different terminologies. All traditions recognize that awakening isn't a single event, but progressive unfolding, that certain capacities must develop before others become possible, that attempting to skip stages leads to problems. Modern approaches ignoring this accumulated wisdom often produce people with peak experiences, but no sustained transformation. Glimpses of awakening without developmental foundation to integrate and embody them. The signs of each stage are distinctive if you know what to look for. In preparation stage, consciousness is primarily identified with physical and emotional body, reactive, driven by external circumstances, little self-awareness. Someone at this stage might be interested in spirituality but hasn't begun genuine practice. In purification stage, which Steiner called probation, you're actively working with yourself, developing self-observation, beginning to gain some control over reactions, encountering shadow material. Signs include increased dreams, emergence of repressed material, periods of disorientation, as old structures begin dissolving. In illumination stage, consciousness begins disidentifying from thoughts and emotions. Witness awareness develops. Moments of genuine peace and clarity become more frequent. Signs include spontaneous insights, synchronicities, feeling of guidance, direct perception of energetic realities. In union stage, boundaries between self and other become permeable. Identification with separate self weakens dramatically. Compassion arises naturally without effort. Signs include sense of being lived by larger intelligence, spontaneous right action without deliberation, perception of unity underlying apparent diversity. The developmental progression is neither linear nor permanent. You can have advanced experiences from later stages while still primarily functioning at earlier stage. You can regress under stress, crisis, illness. Development is more like spiral than ladder, revisiting same issues at deeper levels. But there is directionality, movement toward increasing complexity, inclusivity, consciousness, and freedom. First major transition is from a pre-personal to personal, developing strong, healthy ego, capacity for autonomous thought and action. This is where most Western psychology stops, but it's only halfway point. Second major transition is from personal to transpersonal, beginning to disidentify from ego while retaining its functional capacities. This is where genuine spiritual development begins. Third transition is from transpersonal to non-dual, recognition of consciousness itself as your true nature, transcending even the spiritual seeker. Few reach this naturally, most require intense practice or grace or both. And understanding these stages prevents spiritual materialism, using spiritual concepts to reinforce ego rather than transcend it. Someone at early stages adopting language of non-duality is like a child using calculus equations they don't understand. It might sound impressive, but indicates confusion, not realization. Different practices are appropriate to different stages. Early stages require basic training, ethics, concentration, emotional regulation, physical health. Middle stages require intense self-inquiry, shadow work, energy practices, guided by someone who has traversed this territory. Late stages require surrender of everything, including the spiritual path itself, dying to the one who is seeking awakening. Trying to practice late-stage teachings at early stages is confusing at best, dangerous at worst. Trying to remain with early-stage practices when you've developed beyond them is stagnating. Each stage requires different medicine, different teaching, different guidance. The protocol for navigating stages begins with honest assessment of where you actually are, not where you wish to be or think you should be. Work with teacher or community that can provide objective feedback. Practice appropriate to your level with discipline and sincerity. Be patient. Development takes time. Trying to force faster progress usually backfires. When you encounter resistance, difficulty, or plateau, that's not failure, but sign that deeper work is required at current level before advancing. Document your process through journaling, tracking practices, noting changes over months and years. Find markers that indicate genuine development. Are you kinder, more patient, less reactive, more present? Can you maintain awareness in difficult situations? These are better indicators than spectacular experiences. We arrive at liberating recognition. The path is long, but it is real. Awakening is not fantasy, but achievable reality. And you are exactly where you need to be right now. Whatever stage you're at is perfect starting point because it's where you actually are. Comparing yourself to others, wishing you were further along, feeling inadequate or superior, all of this is ego's game, has nothing to do with actual development. Each stage has its gifts, its challenges, its lessons. Honor where you are while remaining open to what's next. Trust the process that has been tested by thousands before you, verified by every tradition that penetrated beyond surface spirituality. The destination isn't some future state, but the progressive recognition of what you are right now beneath all the stages, beneath all the development, beneath all the seeking. You are already that which you're seeking to become, and the path is simply removing the layers of misidentification that obscure this obvious truth. This is paradox of the path. You must work diligently to realize that there was never anywhere to go and nothing to achieve, Yet, without the work, this recognition remains concept rather than lived reality. Steiner spoke of something that sounds like pure mysticism until you experience it directly. The Akashic Records, a kind of cosmic memory bank where everything that has ever happened, every thought, action, emotion, every life ever lived, exists eternally as vibrational imprint accessible to consciousness trained to perceive it. This isn't metaphor, not poetic language for ordinary memory. He described specific practices for developing capacity to read these records, to access information about your own past lives, about historical events, about the evolution of consciousness itself. And before you dismiss this as fantasy, understand that Steiner used this capacity to write detailed accounts of Atlantis, of ancient civilizations, of esoteric dimensions of major religions, providing information that couldn't have come from conventional scholarship. Whether you interpret Akashic Records literally as cosmic database or as deep level of unconscious mind containing collective memory, the practical question is, can this capacity be developed? And the answer, verified by those who undertake the necessary training, is yes. Scientific correlates exist in research on consciousness and information theory. Quantum physics has demonstrated non-locality, the way information can be entangled across space and time in ways that violate classical physics. Research by physicist David Bohm proposed implicate order, underlying reality where everything is connected and folded together. Research on morphic resonance by Rupert Sheldrake suggests that memory might not be stored only in brains, but in fields, extending beyond physical bodies, explaining how skills and instincts can appear across species without genetic transmission. Studies on past life regression by psychiatrists, like Ian Stevenson, documented cases where children reported detailed memories of previous lives, later verified as historically accurate. While mainstream science doesn't accept Akashic Records hypothesis, the data suggesting some form of non-local memory or information field is becoming harder to dismiss. Traditional teachings across cultures describe this cosmic memory in various terms. In Hindu philosophy, Akasha is fifth element, ether, substrate underlying physical reality where impressions of all action are stored. Yogis who develop certain siddhis or powers can access this level of reality. In Buddhism, the alaya vijnana, or storehouse consciousness, contains seeds of all past karma, all previous experiences. In Kabbalistic teaching, there's concept of Yesod, foundation realm, where astral light records all phenomena. Christian mysticism speaks of the Book of Life, where all deeds are recorded. Indigenous traditions worldwide speak of dreamtime, songlines, ways of accessing knowledge about past, future, distant places through altered states. What's consistent is recognition that consciousness, when properly trained, can access information beyond ordinary sensory perception, beyond individual memory, tapping into some larger field of knowledge. The signs that you're beginning to access these deeper levels of memory are subtle but distinctive. You have dreams of other times, other places, other lives that feel more real than ordinary dreams. You experience spontaneous knowledge about historical periods or places you've never studied. You meet someone and have instant deep recognition, sense that you've known them before. You visit location and know your way around, despite never having been there. During meditation, images, scenes, narratives arise that don't feel like imagination, but like memory, except they're not from current life. You experience déjà vu frequently, sense of having lived moments before. You have skills or knowledge that don't correlate with your education or experience in this life. Young children often have stronger access to these memories before socialization trains them to ignore this dimension, which is why they sometimes speak about when I was big before, or describe details of previous lives. The developmental stages of accessing Akashic Records follow progression, Steiner outlined systematically. First stage is purification of consciousness through meditation and ethical living, creating clarity necessary for subtle perception. Second stage is developing concentration powerful enough to hold attention on internal images without distraction. Third stage is learning to distinguish genuine Akashic perception from imagination, fantasy, wish fulfillment, which requires honest self-assessment and ideally verification from teacher who has developed this capacity. Fourth stage is learning to enter the records intentionally, asking specific questions, seeking specific information, rather than just receiving random impressions. Fifth stage is developing capacity to read not just your own past, but collective human history, cosmic evolution, and even potential futures. This level was what Steiner called spiritual science, using trained clairvoyance as research tool. And accessing these records transforms your understanding of who you are. You recognize yourself not as this one lifetime, this one personality, but as vast being that has lived many lives, accumulated enormous experience, developed capacities across centuries. Current personality is like a single page in an enormous book, and when you can access previous chapters, current life makes more sense. why you're drawn to certain things, afraid of others, naturally talented in some areas, struggle in others, all of this becomes clear when you see pattern across lifetimes. Relationships reveal themselves as continuation of previous connections, karma playing out, souls agreeing to meet again to work out unfinished business or continue collaborative growth. Your life's challenges make sense as exactly what you need for current stage of evolution, lessons you chose before incarnating. The protocol for developing this capacity is demanding and cannot be rushed. First, establish daily meditation practice for minimum of 1 year, developing concentration and stability of attention. Second, practice strict truthfulness in all things, because accessing truth requires being truthful. Any self-deception corrupts subtle perception. Third, study Steiner's specific exercises in How to Know Higher Worlds, particularly the 6 basic exercises for developing soul capacities. Fourth, work with dreams systematically, keeping journal, learning dream language, developing lucidity. Dreams are gateway to Akashic realm. Fifth, practice what Steiner called objective thinking, meditation on simple objects or concepts with complete focus, without personal association or emotional reaction. This develops capacity for pure perception. Sixth, find teacher or community working with these practices, because verification from others who have developed similar capacities is essential for not getting lost in fantasy. We arrive at the profound recognition that you're not who you think you are, in even more radical sense than previous teachings suggested. You're not just not your thoughts or emotions or body in this life. You're not even just this life. You are eternal being that has existed before this birth and will continue after this death, that has lived countless times, that contains within its memory everything it has ever experienced across all incarnations. Your true nature is not personality or even soul in individual sense, but what Steiner called the eternal I, thread of consciousness, weaving through multiple existences, learning, growing, evolving toward some ultimate recognition of itself as consciousness itself. And the Akashic records are not external database you access, but deeper level of your own being, cosmic memory that is simultaneously universal and intensely personal, because you are not separate from cosmos, but are cosmos knowing itself through this particular perspective. When you access these records, you're not reading something outside yourself. You're remembering what you already know, have always known, could never forget, because it's written in the very structure of your consciousness. This is your true memory, and awakening to it is remembering who and what you really are beyond the narrow confines of current incarnation. Steiner spoke of something that sounds like pure esotericism, until you begin experiencing it directly, the development of what he called higher bodies, subtle vehicles of consciousness that must be consciously built through specific practices before higher spiritual capacities can fully manifest. He wasn't speaking metaphorically about character development or psychological growth, but describing actual construction of energy structures, what he called the spirit self, life spirit, and spirit man, progressively refined vehicles allowing consciousness to function in dimensions beyond physical and astral planes. Other traditions call this the light body, the rainbow body, the diamond body, the resurrection body, different names pointing to same developmental process, the transformation of your energy structure from something unconscious and automatic into something consciously directed, refined enough to serve as vehicle for awakened consciousness. This is advanced work, yet it begins with simple practices anyone can undertake. Progressive refinement of energy, body through attention and intention over years of sustained effort. Scientific understanding of biofields and energy medicine provides framework for approaching this, even if mainstream science hasn't caught up to what practitioners experience. Research at institutions like the HeartMath Institute has documented measurable electromagnetic fields generated by the heart extending several feet from the body, and shown these fields affect the physiology of people nearby. Studies on Qigong and Tai Chi practitioners show measurable changes in bioelectric activity, increased coherence in energy patterns. Research on meditation by Herbert Benson and others shows that long-term practice produces measurable physiological changes, decreased stress markers, improved immune function, changes in brain structure and function. While science doesn't use terms like light body, the data shows that consciousness can systematically alter the body's energy patterns through directed practice, creating measurable changes that persist even when not actively practicing. Traditional teachings on light body development are remarkably consistent, despite different cultural contexts. In Tibetan Buddhism, the rainbow body is a documented phenomenon, where advanced practitioners at death dissolve their physical body completely, leaving only hair and nails, their consciousness having transformed matter into light. In Taoist alchemy, the golden elixir and immortal fetus are stages in development of energy body that can survive physical death, achieved through specific internal practices, working with Jing, Qi, and Shen. In Kabbalah, the development of Yechida, The highest soul level requires building what's called the Merkaba, light vehicle allowing travel through spiritual dimensions. In Christian mysticism, the resurrection body is not just a metaphor for life after death, but refers to actual transfiguration of physical form into light body, as depicted in Transfiguration of Christ. In Egyptian initiation, the Ka body is developed through specific practices, allowing consciousness to function independent of physical form. The practices vary, but principle is consistent. Through sustained work with energy, breath, consciousness, and intention, subtle body structures can be developed that transcend limitations of ordinary physical vehicle. The signs that your energy body is developing and refining appear gradually and progressively. You feel energy more tangibly in your body, particularly along spine and hands and major energy centers. Sensitivity increases, you feel other people's energy fields, sense the energetic quality of places and situations. Your need for sleep may decrease because you're drawing energy directly from subtler sources rather than depending entirely on physical rest. You experience light internally during meditation, sometimes colors, geometric patterns, luminosity that isn't coming from external source. Your body may go through purification processes, detox symptoms, emotional releases, physical restructuring that conventional medicine can't explain. You might experience heat, spontaneous movements, kriyas, as energy moves through channels being opened. Some people report their physical appearance changing, becoming more luminous, aging process slowing or reversing. You develop capacities that seem supernatural, seeing auras, psychic perception, healing abilities, because these aren't supernatural but natural functions of developed energy body. The developmental stages of light body construction follow clear progression, though timing varies dramatically between individuals. First stage is becoming conscious of energy body, beginning to feel subtle currents, learning to direct attention into energy dimension rather than just physical sensation. Second stage is clearing blockages, working through areas where energy is stuck, dense, not flowing, which usually corresponds with emotional and psychological material requiring integration. Third stage is opening and balancing the chakras, major energy centers, each associated with specific capacities and consciousness levels. Fourth stage is developing central channel, what yogis call sushumna, the pathway for kundalini to rise through transforming consciousness as it activates each center. Fifth stage is integration of all elements into coherent, unified field, what traditions call achieving the rainbow body or light body proper, where physical form becomes increasingly transparent to consciousness, increasingly filled with light. And developing light body transforms everything about existence. Physical health often improves dramatically because you're no longer dependent only on physical resources, but drawing energy from subtler sources. Consciousness expands because light body is not limited by physical brain, can access information and dimensions physical senses can't reach. Death loses its terror because you know from direct experience that consciousness continues in subtle body after physical body dies. Relationships become energetic exchanges. You're aware of what's happening on subtle levels, can consciously direct energy toward healing, supporting, connecting. Your sense of self shifts from identification with physical form to identification with consciousness using multiple vehicles, of which physical body is just one, and perhaps not even the most important. Life becomes recognized as school for developing these capacities, each challenge perfectly designed to catalyze next stage of energy body development. The protocol for building light body is systematic, though demanding. First, establish daily practice combining physical yoga or qigong with breathwork, consciously moving energy through your body. Second, work specifically with chakras, using visualization, sound, specific meditations for each center, progressively opening and balancing them. Third, practice the microcosmic orbit, circulating energy up spine and down front of body, basic energetic circulation that builds foundation. Fourth, work with Kundalini carefully, either spontaneously if it awakens on its own or deliberately under proper guidance, because improper Kundalini work can create serious energetic and psychological problems. Fifth, maintain impeccable self-care, clean diet, pure water, time in nature, avoiding substances and influences that corrupt energy field. Sixth, find teacher who has walked this path, because without guidance from someone with developed perception, you can waste years or create problems thinking you're making progress when you're actually going sideways or backwards. We arrive at the ultimate teaching about the body, that physical form is not prison but temple, not obstacle to transcendence but vehicle for it, and that the work is not escaping the body but transforming it, refining it, filling it with light until matter itself becomes transparent to consciousness. This is what Steiner meant by spiritual science, the systematic development of human capacities beyond current limitations. Evolution of consciousness, and its vehicles continuing the trajectory that brought us from mineral to plant to animal to human, and now towards something beyond human. You are not meant to remain as you are work in progress. The light body is next stage of your development, available to anyone willing to undertake the practices with discipline and dedication over years and decades. This is not fantasy, not New Age wishful thinking, but documented reality verified by every tradition that works systematically with human energy and consciousness. Your body can become temple of light, vehicle for awakened consciousness, form refined enough to serve as instrument for the eternal I to fully manifest in physical dimension. This is your birthright and your destiny, and it awaits your choice to begin the work. Now we arrive at the final teaching, perhaps the most difficult. What happens after awakening, how to live as conscious being in world of sleepers, what responsibility comes with seeing what others cannot see, knowing what others do not know. Steiner emphasized that spiritual development is not escape from world, but preparation for greater service to it, that abilities developed through inner work are meant to be used for collective evolution, not just personal satisfaction. This is where many spiritual seekers fail, achieving some degree of awakening, then retreating into isolation, unable or unwilling to engage the messy complexity of ordinary human life. But genuine awakening doesn't separate you from humanity. It deepens your connection to it, your compassion for it, your willingness to participate in its evolution, even knowing that evolution is slow, painful, filled with setbacks and suffering. The awakened person doesn't transcend human condition. They embody it more fully, bringing light of consciousness into the darkness of collective sleep. Research on post-traumatic growth and transformative experiences shows consistent pattern. People who undergo profound transformation often feel isolated, misunderstood, unable to communicate what they've experienced to others who haven't had similar experiences. Studies on integration of peak experiences, particularly by Stanislav Grof and others working with psychedelic therapy, emphasize that the experience itself is less important than how it's integrated into daily life. Research on altruism and compassion shows that people with strong contemplative practice and spiritual development consistently demonstrate greater empathy, generosity, and willingness to serve others. Studies on meaning and purpose show that people who have experienced awakening or profound transformation report greater sense of life, meaning, and deeper commitment to contributing to something larger than personal interests. Science is confirming what traditions always taught. Genuine spiritual development increases rather than decreases engagement with world and concern for collective well-being. Traditional teachings unanimously emphasize that awakening brings responsibility, not privilege. The Bodhisattva vow in Buddhism is explicit commitment to continue incarnating, to delay final liberation until all beings are liberated. The awakened one returns to marketplace, helping others, not remaining on mountain in solitary bliss. In Christian mysticism, the unitive stage doesn't end with union with divine, but with return to world as instrument of divine will, serving the least, the suffering, the lost. In Kabbalah, the one who reaches Kether must descend again through all Sephiroth, bringing light into every level, rectifying world. In shamanic traditions, the initiate who survives journey to spirit world returns as healer, guide, bridge between worlds for community. Steiner himself exemplified this, taking spiritual science into practical applications. Waldorf education, biodynamic agriculture, anthroposophical medicine, social renewal movements, not because these were separate from spiritual work, but because they were spiritual work made manifest in world. The signs that someone has achieved awakening without responsibility are unfortunately common in spiritual communities. They speak enlightenment language but lack basic human kindness. They've had profound experiences but remain emotionally immature, unable to maintain healthy relationships. They claim non-attachment but are actually dissociated, disconnected from human feeling. They talk about non-duality but create hierarchies where they're superior to unenlightened others. They pursue endless peak experiences, spiritual materialism, collecting states like trophies rather than deepening their service. They use spiritual concepts to bypass psychological work, to avoid dealing with trauma, to justify selfishness or manipulation. True awakening shows itself not in extraordinary experiences or spiritual powers, but in ordinary human qualities. Genuine kindness, patience, humility, willingness to help without need for recognition, capacity to be with suffering without trying to fix it, acceptance of life as it is while working to make it better. The developmental challenge of integration is perhaps more difficult than awakening itself. First stage is the return, coming back from peak experience or period of intensive practice into ordinary reality and discovering it's not so ordinary anymore. Everything looks different, but you must function in a world that hasn't changed, among people who didn't experience what you experienced. Second stage is learning to translate, finding language to communicate ineffable experiences without sounding crazy or getting trapped in spiritual concepts. Third stage is discovering your unique form of service, how your particular gifts and circumstances position you to contribute to collective awakening. Fourth stage is sustaining practice while engaged in world, maintaining connection to source while dealing with demands of relationships, work, daily life. Fifth stage is recognizing that there is no final stage, that development continues indefinitely, that awakening is not achievement, but ongoing process requiring constant commitment. And living as awakened being in sleeping world requires specific capacities and practices. You must develop what Steiner called thinking of the heart, ability to think clearly while remaining emotionally open, to analyze without dissociating, to feel deeply without being overwhelmed. You must learn to speak multiple languages, communicating with people at their level of development rather than imposing your perspective. You must develop patience, recognizing that evolution proceeds at its own pace, that you cannot force others to wake up, can only create conditions where awakening becomes possible. You must maintain your own practice, knowing that staying awake requires constant vigilance, that falling back asleep is always possible, that consciousness must be continuously renewed through practice, study, community. You must find others doing this work, because walking this path alone leads to either inflation or despair. You need reality checks from those who can see what you see, who can call out your blind spots, who can hold you accountable to your highest values. The protocol for embodied awakening is lifetime commitment, not weekend workshop. First, establish daily practice that grounds awakening in your actual life. Meditation, study, service, whatever, keeps you connected to source and committed to evolution. Second, find your work in world, not necessarily job or career, but your unique contribution, what only you can do because of combination of your gifts, wounds, circumstances, and development. Third, stay in relationship even when difficult, using relationship as practice ground for awakening, letting others be your teachers, your mirrors, your opportunities for compassion. Fourth, remain humble, knowing that you don't know, that every insight is partial, that reality is far more vast than any framework can contain. Fifth, serve without needing results, doing the work because it's your work to do, not because you'll see transformation in your lifetime. Sixth, take care of yourself knowing that you cannot serve from depleted state, that genuine service requires fullness, that self-care is not selfish but necessary for sustainable engagement. We arrive at the final recognition that awakening is not end but beginning, that everything you've learned through these teachings is preparation for real work. Living as conscious being in world that desperately needs consciousness, serving evolution of humanity through your unique expression of awakened awareness, being light in darkness not as metaphor but as lived reality. You didn't wake up for yourself, you woke up for all of us, because in truth there is no separation. Your awakening is contributing to collective awakening even if you never speak of it, even if no one knows. The frequency of consciousness itself is contagious, presence itself teaches, and by doing your inner work, by maintaining your practice, by living with integrity and compassion, you are participating in most important work there is, the awakening of human consciousness from the sleep of millennia. This is what Steiner devoted his life to, what all true teachers throughout history have pointed toward, and what now falls to you to embody. Remembering that you are the dreamer, not the dream, consciousness itself witnessing the grand theater of existence and bringing that remembering into every moment, every relationship, every choice. This is responsibility of awakening, and it is simultaneously the heaviest burden and the greatest joy, because you know now what cannot be unknown, you've seen what cannot be unseen, and there is no going back, only forward into greater consciousness, greater love, greater service to the one appearing as many, remembering itself through your eyes, through your heart, through your awakened presence in this sleeping world,